right, welcome to the General Order 1 podcast. I'm your host, Scott, and I'm joined by my longtime friend, Ben.
Hello.
On this podcast, we're discussing Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Specifically today, we are discussing Season 1, Episode 2, which is titled Children of the Comet.
And fittingly enough, this is Season 1, Episode 2 of our Goop podcast.
That's true.
And welcome to all of Gwyneth Paltrow's very confused followers.
There's a lot of people out there right now searching for Goop podcasts, expecting Gwyneth Paltrow, and they got stuck with us. They're very disappointed.
Yep.
Well, let's kick it off. So the episode opens with Uhura doing a quick voiceover, and she just mentions that the USS Enterprise is studying an old comet around a planet named Persephone 3. And so right off the bat, probably a pretty standard Starfleet mission. They're just, out surveying, just seeing what's going on. So about after the voiceover closed, you see Uhura meet up with Ortega in the hallways. It's not clear where, but somewhere on the Enterprise. And Uhura is wearing her dress uniform. She looks pretty fancy. And Ortega is definitely dressed more casually. And she mentioned...
does look fairly fancy, but, as always, the Starfleet dress uniform just doesn't look that dressy.
No, I made that exact same note too. I'm like the dress uniform is basically like the standard uniform with like some cleaner corners and maybe some brighter colors.
But it's got like a fancy Starfleet insignia on it,
yeah.
And it's really not that different. I mean, if you look at an Earth military, like their regular uniform, which is usually just fatigues, versus their dress uniform is just dramatically different, and they look very, very fancy in their dress uniform. Starfleet not down for that. Apparently, fashion is. We're not trying to impress anybody in the 24th century, I guess.
I'm glad you said that because I made that exact same note. They do have dress uniforms. They don't wear them very often, but yeah, it really doesn't look that different than their day-to-day. Like
it's not the tunic from Next Generation.
Right.
This one looks a little better. So apparently things are getting much, much worse as the years go by.
Did you notice that Ortega actually is showing off her midriff? You can see her belly button.
I know it was quite risque for.
It was almost scandalous, but on top of that, yeah, like it was. She's very casual, and here is Uhura all dressed up. So
yeah,
so Ortega and her have a conversation, and they basically determine that she's hazing the new girl, right? And this is kind of one of the things that they do. But she does mention that they are on the way to Pike's cabin, where he is having a big dinner party.
Yep, and call back to the last episode. I commented that I hoped we'd see more of Uhura, and also just in general, the first episode, it's Pike and Spock wall to wall. Like the other characters are kind of there, but they get a little bit of a name drop. We hear Ortega's name, we hear Uhura's name. That's about it from them in that entire episode. So it was nice that this one starts with those two characters. We get a little bit of a real introduction to them.
This is, clearly a very Uhura-centered episode, and I think it's done really well. So I did make a note that they mentioned that she's on the way to Pike's cabin. I've always heard them called quarters, but in this particular, they're on their way to Pike's cabin. I mean, clearly it's a cabin on the Enterprise, not like his cabin in Montana. I just thought it was kind of
weird.
And
we'll have to see if that if that's just their nomenclature for where a member of the crew sleeps, or if Pike's cabin is special because it's the captain's.
Yeah, could be.
And it's the size of a cabin.
It is, yeah, right. I don't remember in any of the other Star Trek them being called cabins, but maybe. I mean, it's not important.
Yeah, it was always quarters before. So
okay, all right. So it cuts to they get to Pike's quarters. They ring the doorbell or whatever, and Pike answers. And he's making ribs. He says, "Come on in," and he makes note of Uhura's dress uniform, and he says, "Oh, they got you, essentially, right?
Yeah.
They tricked you into wearing your dress uniform." But he is dressed, casually, I would say, and he's in a very good mood. He's like, "I got to run. I got to get back to the ribs." He's got a big dinner party going. There's probably 10 or 15 people in his cabin. They're clearly just having a party.
And I'll get past this, after, but. Again, this room is massive. His quarters are huge. You drop this in Manhattan, and this is a huge apartment.
And it's fancy too. It's not just
Right.
big. Like it's got a lot of amenities that I don't recall seeing in
So
other Star Trek ships.
yeah, it's good to be the captain, or a significant portion of the interior of the Enterprise is devoted to just crew quarters. Because if this is, I
Oh,
mean, in like Next Generation, Picard's quarters were bigger, were noticeably a little bit larger, but not a ton. They
oh,
were,
right.
maybe half again as big as everybody else's.
I mean,
But
they have limited square footage. It's a starship, right? I mean, it's
right,
I equate it to like a like an ocean liner, right? I mean, those the quarters on it. If you go on a cruise, they're small on purpose because you want to have room for amenities, not quarters. But anyway,
right.
so Uhura and she's trying to fit in here. Everybody is already at the party and they're all relaxed and having a good time. And we get our first appearance of Officer Hemmer, who is he's a blue-skinned alien creature that we have not seen before. I thought it was something that we had seen before, but I had to look it up. He is an Anar, Aenar. So he's got like two kind of like blue alien like antennas and a
Yeah,
blue face.
yeah. I thought it was an Andorian at first, but
Yeah,
they
that's
they
what I
do look
thought
a
too.
little bit different.
I had to look it up, but yeah, he is different. So the one thing that, and this comes into play clearly a lot in the rest of the season. So Hemmer is blind, and so Uhura makes mention that he is disabled, and he kind of takes offense at that. He is not happy about being called disabled. In fact, he makes mention that his senses, other than his sight, are actually superior to most humans, and I think even the Vulcans. So Hemmer's he's cocky. He's got a little swagger to him. Um, so he lets Uhura know that he's not a disabled guy who needs you to help him out. Oh, it's worth noting that he's actually cutting carrots with a knife, which is why
Yeah,
Uhura volunteers to help because this blind guy's got a knife, right?
yeah, and she makes note that in her culture it would be polite to help someone, and he clearly isn't having it. And we
Or
get a little like over the back catch of I can't remember
yeah,
what Mike tosses to him, but just to really hammer home that this guy's got he's Daredevil basically.
yes. So Hemmer basically is it Hemmer or Spock? One of them mentions that, or maybe it's Uhura mentions that some people say that the Anar have a form of precognition and that they can read people's minds or see the future. And there's a little bit, and that's where the toss comes in, and he was like, "Oh, I saw that coming," kind of thing. So
Right, right.
there's no real definition, or you don't clearly see any of that here, but I think it's setting the scene for later. So it just might be something worth noting that
Yeah,
um,
and I couldn't tell if we're supposed to take that at face value or if we're supposed to not be sure if that's actually true.
I wasn't sure either. I will tell you that Hemmer plays a huge part in the rest of the season, so you will see a lot more of him, and his character will definitely get fleshed out.
Well, that's good because so far it was just, hey, hey, here he is. It
Yeah,
was a bit like the introduction of the chief engineer in Next Generation, where we see this guy, he has a line or two, and then he's never seen again.
right. Oh, it is worth noting. I don't think I said that Hemmer is the chief engineer of the Enterprise.
Yes.
So Hemmer is played by an actor named Bruce Horak, who is actually blind in real life.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
cool.
So there was kind of that was kind of a talking point online, like, hey, they got this actor who's really blind playing a blind character in the show, and I'm curious because I've seen a lot of the rest of it, but I'm curious what you think as we go on, how well Hemmer handles himself on the Enterprise being blind, not only as a chief engineer, but just in general, how well he does things. It's worth seeing. I think that they're playing up the fact that he is very much not disabled because he's a chief engineer, so that takes work, right? But he's also very functional just in day-to-day life.
Yeah, and so far seems quite capable. Although
Clearly, if he's cutting
all we've
carrots.
seen him do is cutting carrots. We haven't seen him fix anything on the Enterprise yet, so we'll see.
So it cuts back to Pike at this dinner party. They are now, I assume this is after they've eaten, or Pike is telling a story. He's telling a joke about he's chasing some alien and the alien's pants fall off. I don't remember. But Pike has everyone in stitches. And actually, the story that he tells, I wrote down that he's extremely charismatic in this scene. I don't know what it was, but like I just want to hang out with this guy. Like he just looks like he would be super fun to chill with.
Yeah, the only thing I noted was Uhura is laughing at everything he says, like kind of over the top, and I thought we were gonna get a like, oh, she's kissing up to the captain moment for a minute. I mean, it was to
Yeah.
that point. Like every time he says something, she's just laughing hysterically at it. So I thought, okay, is she going to get called out for kissing up to the captain? But apparently not. It was meant to be that it was genuine. And
Yeah, that does not happen because the very next thing, well, Uhura or Pike actually asks Uhura, he says, "Oh, I hear you speak 12 languages." And she corrects him and says, "I speak 37 languages." She mentions that she is from Kenya. So they actually give a little bit more of her backstory. So they're fleshing out her character some more. So you Pike kind of you come to learn later that Pike has this routine where he asks the new recruits on his ship this one standard question. And one of the things that, or the primary question is, where do you see yourself in 10? And he kind of pauses and then finishes and says 10 years. So Pike catches himself when he starts asking her where she sees herself in 10 years. The implication being that he is now aware of his own mortality and in 10 years he will be dead.
yeah, he clearly like it's this is a reflex to him.
Yeah.
He's clearly asked this question of a million people by now. And so he's just going off a script, and then his brain trips on that 10-year part pretty
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
He like number one gives him a very knowing look. She clearly gets the implication of what just happened, but everyone else in the room is oblivious to it and just runs along with his question. So,
Right. So,
by
he
the way,
says,
I did expect him to follow up with asking her what her greatest weakness was.
right. So, like, it's like the most typical job interview questions ever.
Right.
Right. He catches himself because in 10 years he's going to be dead. She responds, I don't know what I'm going to do in 10 years. She says, I'm really not sold on Starfleet yet. She's not drinking the Starfleet Kool-Aid yet.
Yeah, and pretty bold of her to
Right.
come right out with, yeah, I don't really even know if I want to be here.
Well, yeah, right in front of her, not only right in front of her boss, but in front of all of her coworkers. Like all these people that you're going to be relying on, and you're just basically like, yeah, I don't know if this is really my thing.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing, kind of thing you might want to bring up before we're out on our 5-year
Yeah.
mission. But
So Pike actually calls her on it, and he says, "Oh, that's not an answer that I think I've ever gotten before." And he says, we don't get a lot of recruits from Starfleet. He says, didn't you beat out about 1,000 candidates to get positioned here on the Enterprise? And Spock actually corrects Pike and says several thousand. So we're learning a little bit more about Uhura, that she's got some chops, at least according to Starfleet, that she beat out 2,000 people, even if she's not really sold on being there yet. Which is probably a callback to the first episode where I think he calls her the Prodigy.
yeah, so the implication being that the Enterprise is not a posting you get right out of Starfleet Academy.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Like you have to, you got to work your way up through some other ships before you get onto the Enterprise. Since it's the flagship, it's the big, premier destination. So that makes sense. I mean,
Sure.
officers with experience are going to want to come here. So, as someone coming as a cadet, would be pretty unusual, which makes sense. Again, as opposed to the J.J. Abrams universe where you can graduate and become captain of the Enterprise right out of the gate. So,
So, Pike's a little incredulous that she's not sold on Starfleet. And so Uhura gives a little bit more of her personal backstory. And she mentions that she studied linguistics she was going to study linguistics at the University of Nairobi. But she was essentially distracted because her parents and her brother were killed in a shuttle accident right before she was going to go to college. And that was obviously a pretty traumatic moment in her life, so she backed off of school or of formal schooling for a while she dealt with that. She
yeah,
mentioned,
specifically, she says she didn't want to be on the campus without them there because it would just, it would be really weird to not see them there since
yeah,
she
didn't she
grew
say
up with them
they
on
were teachers
campus.
at that school? Isn't that what she
Yeah,
said? Yeah,
yeah.
right. So rather than going to school, she went to live with her grandparents and was just trying to, find herself, figure out what she wanted to do. Apparently, her grandmother was She said, I think she said big into Starfleet. I don't know if that meant she was in Starfleet or she was just a big proponent of Starfleet. But her grandma used to talk Starfleet up, so
I think she specifically says that her grandma was a Starfleet officer.
that would certainly make sense. So
Yeah.
she's basically, says my grandma was big on it. I guess I didn't really have a whole lot. I didn't want to go to college, so I guess she begrudgingly joins Starfleet, becomes this prodigy, gets posted to the flagship. So, hey, I guess it worked out one way or the other. But she's still not sold. She's not sure she's going to be, she's going to stay in Starfleet. She has as of right now, she has a temporary position on the Enterprise. It is not a. I don't believe she's a commissioned officer yet.
Yeah, that was the impression I got, was that she's still in kind of her onboarding phase where,
Yeah, she's on probation, kind of.
yeah.
So there's one quick, and that's the end of that scene. So it's really just some backstory about Uhura, her skills, and what her story is, which certainly comes up later in the episode. So this is clearly just setting up her character. But there's a super quick scene after this where Spock and Uhura are walking in the hallway, and he's trying to figure out, more about her. He's like, he's also Spock is also confused that she's on the Enterprise, and Spock's line was, if it's not your path, you might consider making the way for someone else who wants to walk it. So he's basically saying, hey, I mean, I get that you're here and you're smart, but if your heart's not in it, then, maybe give up your spot for somebody who is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's equal parts, hey, you should do what speaks to you. You should, live the life that you want to live. So he's encouraging her to, do what feels right to you. But I think it's also equal parts admonishment where he's saying, and
Yeah.
also there's a lot of people who want to be here. So
Clearly
if
there
you
was,
don't, don't stand in the way of someone else's dreams if you're
yeah,
not following your own.
there were thousands of other people that she beat out, so, right. So,
Yeah.
um,
Speaking of Spock, we should mention that during that dinner party, part of the story that Pike told about running away from the Nausicaan and tripping on his pants, they were laughing, and Spock makes a comment about how strange it is that humans laugh at others' misfortune, and Pike says something along the lines of, "Well, when things are so bad, sometimes the only thing to do is laugh,"
yes, absolutely.
which will come back later.
Definitely, yeah, just playing to Spock's not understanding human emotions, and definitely, yeah, circles back later. So the next thing is a quick scene of Pike and Number One in his cabin doing the dishes, and they're kind of having a debate, and she's asking Pike, like, because he's hung up on this, I'm going to die in 10 years, and she's trying to convince him that maybe that's not set in stone, that maybe it's not your fate that you get burned. And that all this happens to you. Maybe you can choose your own path, is what she said to him. Maybe you don't have to do what you've seen. So we're setting up the stage for perhaps there's an alternative to Pike's future. And Pike's response is, and he lists the names of 5 kids. And he basically says that, sometime in the future, I have to save these kids' lives. So he basically says, hey, I can't, I know the future. I can see it, but I can't change it because if I do, then these 5 kids will die. So
Right.
what we're seeing here is that not only does he see himself burned in the future, it's not like he knows when he dies. He actually sees some other events along the way. So it's not
Yeah,
just
he knows how it's going to happen, and clearly he knows that it's going to happen in the process of saving these 5 kids. So,
yeah. Um,
and, we get a little scene with Number One here. This is another character I'm hoping gets some fleshing out, because so far she just seems to kind of be there to steer Pike in the right direction as far as this whole tragedy coming in his life, but she's really not doing much on the ship so far.
no,
Um,
she's not right. She's
she's the
kind of the
executive
foil to Pike.
officer. Yeah, and I imagine that there's, a bit of shorthand happening here because she was a character with Pike on Discovery.
Yeah.
So presumably most of the audience already is well aware of her and doesn't need another introduction. So, they're focusing in other areas. But for someone like me who hasn't seen Discovery, it'd be nice to get a little more with her, since I mean, at the moment, she's just kind of window dressing. She hasn't had hardly anything to do.
Do you get the impression they're in a relationship?
I don't get that impression. I mean, they just seem like they're very close, like
Yeah.
they're best friends, almost basically, is what it seems
Yeah.
like.
I'm just
Um,
thinking if they were in a relationship, like it would be like wildly inappropriate that the top two members on this ship are basically
yeah, I don't think Starfleet would be
right.
cool with that, and it doesn't. I don't get that vibe. I don't get any romantic vibe from the two of them. But I mean, just the biggest thing I want to know is what's the her name is number one.
She
You
has a
know,
name. Her name is Una, but they almost never use it.
oh, really? Okay. I mean, that's what the character is listed as when you look at the cast list. The character is listed
Yeah.
as number one.
Well,
So,
maybe I'm wrong. At one point, the closed captioning said Una colon, and then it was something that number one was saying. But yes, you're right.
okay.
It is very right. It's very clinical. I guess is the right
Yeah, I
word.
mean,
Right.
and I know, I mean, that's a callback to the original pilot where the first officer was always referred to as number one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little strange to be doing that for multiple episodes now. So
Uh,
I mean, it's one thing to have a nickname, but it's
yeah.
it's something else when that's the only thing anybody calls you.
So the next scene we see is that they're back on the bridge, and Spock is explaining the comet that Uhura mentions in the voiceover at the very beginning of the episode. They have found this comet that is on a collision course with Persephone 3, and it will clash into the planet and basically kill everyone on the surface. They have looked at the surface of this planet, and there is a primitive pre-warp species on the surface named the Deleb. They are pretty primitive, and they are not going to see this coming, so they're just going to get wiped out. So the bridge crew come up with a plan that they're basically going to use some torpedoes to push this comet off course from this planet so that it won't, kill everybody. So they fire a couple torpedoes. They fire four torpedoes at the comet, but the comet, all of a sudden, as soon as just about as the torpedoes are about to hit, you see the shields go up around this comet. Everybody kind of looks at each other like, "What the heck? Why does a comet have a force field?" And then star wipe into the litany and the intro.
Uh, so speaking of, they're going to knock this comet off course. I believe they make some kind of reference to. I don't know if it's at this point in the show or if it's later, but there's a reference made to it's okay that we're interfering with this culture because we're interfering in a way that they're never going to be aware of. So we're changing their destiny. We're going to knock this comet off course so they don't get wiped out and go extinct. But they're never going to even know we were here, so it's not going to affect their development.
Basically, we violated General Order One last episode. We don't want to do it again this one.
Exactly. Like we can't have every episode
Yeah,
be,
that's
So
the whole. Yeah, right.
yep. So yeah, they basically note that there's an exception to General Order One, which is, if there's going to be some kind of extinction event and they can stop it without tipping their hand, that they're allowed to do that. Which makes
So
sense. I mean,
right.
it just seems like the neighborly thing to do. If you're going by and you
Yeah.
see that a comet's going to hit somebody's planet, seems like the nice thing to do.
So then we cut to the mission planning room. They mention that they've scanned the comet and that they don't find any life on the comet. So they're a little confused why there are shields on this comet. They find a structure of some sort on the comet, so that suggests some sort of alien intelligence has built this structure, but there are no life forms on it. So they want to go down and investigate what's going on with this comet, and the Spock mentions that the shields aren't constant; they're not up all the time, so they can beam down during one of the holes in the shields. So this is going to be Uhura's first away mission, and I only
Yeah.
say that because they mention it in the episode about 4 or 5 times. Like several characters say it, like she's like they hammer home, like this is her first mission, and she's a little green.
Yeah, and a couple things I noted during this scene. One of which is that it was bothering me for a minute. What like Spock looked weird. Spock's sideburns are significantly longer now.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I
I
didn't
went
catch
back
that.
and watched some footage from the first episode. He's got like ridiculously long sideburns in episode
Hmm.
two, to the point where it was almost distracting.
I
It's
didn't even
like,
notice. All right.
yeah, like they're all the way down. I mean, he's almost got like mutton. I mean, they're really thin, so it's not like a mutton chop or anything, but it's all, I mean, it's all the way down his jaw almost. Like,
Huh.
uh, and the other thing that I noted was just another, if you start looking for like the loopholes and plot holes in the story, you're gonna kill yourself with Star Trek because there's always a ton of them.
Right.
But if the shields aren't up all the time and they can beam down, it's unclear why they can't just shoot some torpedoes at it when the shields are down.
I thought they mentioned something about that the shields only responded to threats. That was the reasoning for that hole is what I thought was
Okay,
that
maybe I missed that, but
somehow
my understanding was that there's just a cycle where the shields go down at
yeah,
times, which seemed
could
strange.
be.
Like,
Right.
what's the point of having a shield that
If it just
just
cycles. Yeah.
goes down once in a while? Like, it just seemed strange, but because it's clearly not just threats, because later on they can't beam them back because the shields are back up. So it's weird. The shields basically operate as the plot requires,
Yeah.
and we just have to go with that.
So we actually see. So they're going to beam down to the surface of this comet. What they want to do is they want to investigate whatever this cave or structure that they've found from above, and they're going to see if they can find a way on the comet to either shut down the shields or find another way to push this comet out of the way of this planet.
And what's our timeline at this point? I mean, it's like hours before this thing's going to hit the planet at this point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, they are. Yeah, right. They are on. Yeah,
They're
it's
on the clock.
right. So I did make note that they wear these space suits that have these cool looking helmets, and I just wrote that the suits were really badass looking as far as an away mission goes, and having cool looking gear. The costumers on this episode really knocked it out of park on their suits. I thought they looked really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Something that is fairly new to Star Trek. Like if you go back and look at the original series, Next Generation, I mean I think even into DS9 and Voyager, they're never in an environment suit. Like
right.
that's just not a thing that they ever do. And I'm guessing it's just because the costume budget, they didn't have
Oh, that
room in
could
the
have been.
budget for those costumes would be my guess. But
They did a little bit of it in Discovery. They started doing helmets.
yeah,
Yeah.
and in Enterprise they
Oh,
had
did they? Okay.
yeah, they had environment suits in Enterprise pretty regularly, but that was the first show I remember ever. It's kind of weird. You don't think about it when they're not there, but then suddenly when I was watching Enterprise and they've got spacesuits on all the time, you're like, huh, they never did that.
Yeah.
Like, anyway, just an interesting note that like apparently spacesuits will go out of style in the next few decades.
So the away team has beamed down. They're on the surface of this comet now. They find the structure. They enter the structure. They're sort of in this underground cave area, and they find this golden egg that has some sort of writing on it. And I put writing in quote fingers because there's some sort of markings on this, but they don't exactly know what it is. So for whatever reason, Sam Kirk goes over and touches it and gets shocked and knocked way back to the point that he is unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, and he gets like, I mean, it's bad. He gets like thrown 10 feet away from this sucker.
And yeah, it's so bad that they have to defibrillate him. Actually, his heart stops, and so yeah, Spock whips out his medical tricorder and has a defibrillate option.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're supposed to, we're supposed to feel like Sam was being pretty reckless here. Like he just
Sure.
runs up to this thing and starts messing with it, and Spock's like, "Hey, maybe don't do that," and he
Yeah.
keeps doing it, and then Spock yells at him like, "Hey, look out!" and then the thing shocks him and sends him flying. So
Well, isn't I mean I think Kirk's or Sam Kirk's position on the Enterprise. I mean, he's a science officer number one, but I want to say he was also an alien biologist. So if anybody should know better, it
yeah,
should be him, right? You don't just walk up and start poking crap you don't know what it is, right?
yeah, but Starfleet never has like great safety protocols on anything like that.
I I
They
did no,
just check stuff out. So
I did note that at one point, like when he walks up to the golden egg, he says Yahtzee, like he's excited to see it, sort of like
yeah,
a
yeah,
eureka or whatever. And Spock questions me, he's like, "What?" And he says Yahtzee. It's an old Earth game. So Yahtzee is now the dice game is now canonical to the Star Trek universe.
and Spock notes that he's aware of that. He's heard of Yahtzee, so apparently in his studies of Earth culture,
Right.
he's come across it.
So at this point, the uh, Kirk is hurt, and they try and beam him out because they need to get him to sickbay immediately. But the force fields are back up, and this is what you were talking about earlier. And I took this as like, hey, the comet realizes that maybe something's going on and it's trying to defend itself, so it throws back up the shields. But like you said, it could just be to advance the plot too. But the point is that they are in essence stuck on this comet, and Kirk is stable, but he's in a bad place.
Now, and if I remember right, they've lost communication as well, correct?
Yes, right.
Yeah, so they don't know that anyone's injured. They just know that they've lost contact with their away team, and they can't raise them on the communicator, and they can't beam them back.
So the Enterprise realizes that it's lost communication. So we cut back to the bridge, and they come up with kind of this weird plan that they're going to disrupt the shields, with some sort of harmonic frequency or something, just enough that they can get the shields down and they can beam their team out. But right before, like literally seconds before they're about to hit this button and attempt to attack or disrupt the shields on this comet, a big gigantic ship shows up and just attacks the Enterprise and basically, I think, knocks the shields down to 40% or something like that.
It does pretty nominal damage. I mean, it shakes them up, but it's pretty clear that this was a warning shot. They make Pike asks for a damage report and is told the damage was minimal.
Okay.
The shields took most of it. So as we see later that they can really pound the Enterprise. So it seems like this first shot was not meant to harm anybody.
So they get a incoming communication from this ship, and you see on the view screen a CG alien we've never seen before. He introduces himself as the Shepherds, and he mentions that their job is to escort Mahanit and protect it. And Kirk says, Mahanit, is that the comet? And he says, it's not a comet, it's more than that. He says, Mahanit is far more than a comet. Mahanit is one of the ancient arbiters of life, and that these shepherds have basically agreed long, long time ago that their job is to keep these, because you assume that there's more than one of these comets, and that their job is to protect these comets. So they're doing their job. Enterprise, leave this comet alone. Pike explains that Mahanit's just about to collide with this planet, and it's going to kill all the inhabitants, but more importantly, it's going to kill itself. If your job is to protect Mahanit, hey, maybe you want to do something about this because this thing's about to destroy itself. And the shepherds respond, if it is his will to move, he will move. If it is his will to bring life, he will bring life. If Mahanit wills the planet to die, even chooses to die with it, then that is what will happen. As I said, it is preordained.
Yeah, so we figure out at this point that they're not necessarily trying to keep Mahani alive by any means. They're just trying to
Yeah.
make sure no one interferes with it, and that whatever preordained outcome it's following is allowed to occur.
Yeah, clearly they kind of like revere, or they view this Mahanit as some sort of deity, perhaps. So there's a couple scenes. There's some back and forth between the shepherds and Pike, and and at one point, like he says, communications pause or something like that. And I made note, like Pike is not a very good diplomat. Like right here, like this communication he's having with these shepherds, like I was not feeling it. Like I was like, where's Picard when you need him? Because he would know how to talk to these guys. Like Pike was clearly out of his element. He didn't know what to do in this situation.
Yeah, and it's not just a pause. He basically hangs up on them,
Yeah, right.
and then they still are willing to take his call after he decides to come back and talk to him again. So, despite the fact that these guys seem like zealots and they fired on the Enterprise and they just don't seem terribly friendly, they do seem pretty patient.
Yeah.
And
So
clearly, they would prefer not to kill anybody.
right.
They're certainly willing to, but clearly their preference is to solve this without violence. As long as, basically as long as the Enterprise does exactly what they tell them to,
Right.
they're perfectly fine to let them leave and not mess with them.
I think I can't remember if it's here or the next scene, but he basically orders a scan of this Shepard ship, and they do determine they are completely outmatched, both speed and weapons. So they are no challenge for these Shepards. So he's got to figure out a way to make this work without just blowing them up.
Right.
So we cut back to the surface of Mahanit now, and Uhura is doing her job. At this point, she's the linguistics expert, and she is studying this egg, and she is going out of her way to not touch it because she's learned her lesson from Kirk. And while she's working on her iPad and studying this egg and doing her thing, she starts to hum, and the lights on the cave wall actually react to her humming. So you actually see kind of like all the lights in the room and the crevices in the wall actually respond to her humming along, the tune causes the lights to wall up. And she actually says, her line was music, exclamation point. It responds to music. And I just wrote blah. I'm like, like it's, show me, don't tell me. I literally just
Yeah,
saw what
we totally get it. Yeah,
you don't have to spoon feed it to me. Like, okay, I get it.
yeah,
Um,
and they were definitely doing that.
yeah.
We did skip one. There's a couple of times where we flash back and forth between the Enterprise and the away team studying the egg.
Mhm.
Um, there was one of the parts where we flashed to the away team. There was a bit of an exchange with Uhura and Spock about Nurse Chapel,
Yeah.
who yeah, in the scene where they're preparing to go on the away mission. Nurse Chapel is, basically getting them ready for the environment they're going to be
Mhm.
going down to, and warning them about, not getting exposed to alien stuff.
Right.
And yeah, she's like super hitting on Spock.
Yeah, she's pretty. I was gonna say low key, but it's not low key. She's flirting with Spock pretty good.
Yeah, to the point where it's just super unprofessional. So you're like, yeah, this seems like a character who's very like she's got all this advanced knowledge about alien life and bio enhancements, and she's super knowledgeable and you know and she's just doing that. I'm like,
Yeah.
she seems like she's a pro. I don't feel like she would do that unless standards of decorum have changed a lot in the future, perhaps.
Well,
But
also, I don't think it's really a secret that Spock is engaged. I mean, maybe he hasn't told everybody, but it's she's putting the full court press on this guy who's got a girlfriend back on Vulcan.
right. And like, yeah, I mean, like, while they're getting ready to go down this away mission, it's just totally an inappropriate time to be doing that.
Right.
So it seems like a weird take. We have this character set up as being super, together, and she's a pro, and then we basically see her act in a way that's very much not that. So it was a little bit of whiplash.
So we get the amazing line of music. It responds to music, and then Uhura basically gives Ortega and everybody else there, but mostly Ortega, basic music lessons. They talk about the relationship between math and music and notes and how you shift octaves to get from A to B, and so it's just kind of music 101. And Uhura basically figures out that the writing on the egg is essentially musical notes. And so she asks Spock basically to harmonize with her, and they hum together. Like, so Uhura leads, and Spock, follows along. And after a while, the egg opens up. So the egg that clearly the comet is responding to this music.
Yeah, and we find that Uhura is very musically inclined.
I thought that was a cool take on her character because I mean, being a linguistics expert, I mean, certainly music is certainly a way to communicate. So that was cool.
Yeah,
I
and it's in line with the character from the original series. Nichelle Nichols had quite a few scenes in the original Star Trek where she was singing or
Oh, really?
yeah,
I didn't know that.
and that's a big part of Uhura's character in the original show. So
Cool.
it was a nice callback there. I also liked that Spock is he's able to do it, but clearly he's not.
Oh yeah, he was completely tone deaf essentially. I mean, it worked,
Yeah,
but yeah, he was not good. I did note that Uhura has actually an amazing voice. Like she's able to harmonize and
yeah.
hum and Like it was. I mean, it was pretty clear that it was, her. It was, it wasn't dubbed over, and
Yeah, so
or at least I thought it was,
the
and it
actor
sounded
playing
great.
her's got some serious pipes,
Yeah,
and
he's definitely been trained. That's not
the
something you
actor
can
playing
slip up.
Spock definitely does not.
Right,
So
right.
so brave of him to do that.
So they basically figure out that this egg has musical notes on it. They are now able to essentially communicate with the the comet. So you get the impression. So at this point, the force fields are dropped around the comet. So I kind of got the impression that the comet realized they are not a threat and decides to drop the shields. So as soon as the shields drop, the away team is immediately beamed up, and you actually see Nurse Chapel run into the transporter room and help carry Samuel Kirk to sickbay because he is having a bad day.
Yeah, and a little bit of another strange thing here is that we've got a crew member who's basically at death's door here, and we see more of Nurse Chapel, but we don't see Dr. Mbenga at all.
Right. I don't even think he's in this episode.
He's
He is.
not even in the episode, yeah, which was pretty weird.
So, spoiler alert, he becomes a much bigger character, and he's actually a really interesting character later. But yeah, that's a good point. He is not in this episode at all.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe there was a scheduling conflict or something, but it seems an odd choice to not have him here at all.
Well, I'm okay with it. Nurse Chapel's certainly better looking than he is. So,
Well, it depends on who you ask.
we are now back on the bridge, and the shepherds have basically said, "Do not interfere with Mahani. Leave this thing alone. You got an away team down on this Comet. We are not happy about that." Again, the implication is that they're kind of treating this like some sort of deity, and they don't want people messing around with it.
Yeah, and the Enterprise, Pike was hoping that they wouldn't notice that they had this
Right.
away team down there, and then they they basically nonchalantly mention, "Oh yeah, by the way, we've seen we know exactly what you've been doing. We've seen everything that's happened here." So
Well,
clearly, they haven't fooled these guys for a
yeah.
moment.
Well, Ortega
And
has that line where under her breath she says, "Oh, I guess they found the away team." It's like,
right,
come on, dude! Like he just said that. You don't have to. Again, it felt like they were just spoon feeding like the plot. Like,
yeah. So we make a point here of noting that the shepherds have they have sensors that are telling them exactly what's happening here.
yeah.
They're not fooled for a second. They know the away team was there. They know what's going on with the shields. They know when the away team is beamed back. So they've got, advanced technology and they know
Yeah.
exactly what's going on here. We'll come back to that.
So they need to figure out a way to, work with the shepherds, but the shepherds are not having it because they've been poking around because the Enterprise has been poking around. So the shepherds fire on the Enterprise, and I think actually this is the point where the shields go down to 40%. The Enterprise is way outgunned here.
Yeah, at this point, it seems the shepherds have decided, all right, these guys have interfered enough.
Yeah.
We're done playing nice, and we're just going to destroy this ship if it doesn't stop.
So the Pike orders the Enterprise to attack the weapon system and the propulsion system on the Shepherd ship just enough that they can get away and not be destroyed. So they do a quick attack that temporarily disables the Shepherds. So at this point, they're gonna run and get some distance between them. And Spock thinks that Mahani was trying to communicate with them while they were on the surface of the comet. So this musical thing that's going on, he realizes, hey, maybe this thing is essentially sentient and it was trying to talk to us. And so he says he actually asks Uhura, who clearly that's the go-to for translating things like this. He says, what have you figured out what Mahadi might have been trying to say? And she says, well, I haven't been able to translate it yet. It might take days. And in typical Star Trek fashion, Spock responds, well, we have less than 1 hour before the comet will impact with Persephone 3. Basically, you better figure this out or we're all dead.
Right.
So at this point, the Shepherds get their ship at least back up and running enough that they can pursue the Enterprise. So Pike.
Yeah, and we get it. We get a nice moment for Ortegas where she, Pike
Yes.
basically says, "Hey, you always say you're the best pilot in Starfleet. Let's see it." and she does some nice maneuvering to get away from the ship and dodge their fire, and basically put the Enterprise between Mahanit and the Shepherds. So at that point, they are not willing to fire on the Enterprise anymore for fear of hitting the comet.
Exactly. So that was a rather ingenious plan. At least they're trying to give themselves a little bit more time. So once the Enterprise is in position, Pike orders all of the ship's systems except for life support to be shut down. And then he says, basically, hail the Shepherd. So I thought that was interesting because he just said shut down all the systems except for life support, but apparently comms are still on.
And I guess they never say why he does that, but I guess the implication is supposed to be they're trying to keep it so the shepherds can't see them.
Well,
I
I think
guess.
what he said, well, because he calls the shepherds next, and he says, "Hey, we surrender. You know, our ship has taken a ton of damage. We're not going to survive." And he
Right.
says, actually, I don't remember the technical detail, but he basically says, you know, our warp core or whatever is going to explode, and it's going to take the comet with us. You need to help us, and also if you shoot us, it'll blow up and it'll take the comet. So he's basically, you know, bluffing with the shepherds that they cannot take out the Enterprise because it would, in essence, take out their god as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that's why
It's it's
they've killed all
subterfuge.
the systems, is to
Yeah,
try to trick them and make them think they got disabled. Okay.
yeah. So the shepherds, they kind of debate. They're trying to figure out because clearly the Enterprise is not friendly. They want to destroy them earlier. I mean, so the shepherds decide to tractor beam the Enterprise out of uh, being near Mahanit, so Mahanit will not be in danger.
Right.
So the next scene we see, and this I didn't fully understand, so I'm hoping maybe between the two of us we can put it together. So you see Spock in a shuttle, and it's
Yeah.
just Spock. So it's Spock alone, and he's in this shuttle,
Right.
and he's kind of
Pike, as part of the deal with the shepherds to have them tractor the Enterprise away, has sworn to them that they will not touch Mahani again.
right. So Spock is flying this shuttle, sort of in the debris trail, I suppose, of this comet of Mahanit. So he's like doing evasive maneuvers and going through a bunch of rocks in
Yeah,
space.
he's flying as close to the surface of it as he possibly can.
And I noted actually that the CG on this of both the Enterprise and the shuttle flying through these, this debris field, this comet trail was actually really well done. It looked really cool. So
Yeah, we clearly blew a chunk of our effects budget for the season on this scene. There's going to be X number of scenes they have budget
right.
for, and this is one of them clearly, because yeah, it looked really good.
It paid off. Yeah, it looked cool. It did not look fake, or it did not look hokey. So what Spock says is that he is diverting power through the shields of this shuttlecraft. And his line is that the shields are radiating heat at maximum intensity. So I think the implication here is that he's basically turning this shuttle into like a superheated element with the intention of breaking up this ice comet.
Yeah, they say that the comet's sublimating. So what they're doing is they're heating the shuttle up, flying as close to the comet as they can. So they're melting some of the
Yeah,
ice. It's off gassing, and that off gassing is going to create enough thrust that it's going to
sure.
move the comet. Um,
I guess
that
like
that seems like it. If you did that, when it's a couple hundred, when it's way out in
yeah,
orbit, that would totally work. A little nudge when it's a couple million kilometers away is all you need. But when this thing is literally like minutes from impacting the
yeah, right.
planet, I really don't think that would do the trick.
Well, I've
But
also
again, it's Star Trek. It's magical technology. It's
I was
okay.
trying
It's
to
going to
figure
work.
out how insanely hot would that shuttle have to be that you could be you know
Extremely, because heat
and
radiates in space, and
yeah,
it's going to radiate in all directions. It's not going to go very far before it's
right.
not doing much. Just yeah, there's a lot of problems with this plan.
Well,
As
there's
far The Star Trek physics are in
yeah.
full effect for this
Yeah,
one.
there's very much Hollywood hand waving going on in this scene, and I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's why
Not
you
to
watch Star
mention that
Trek.
we've taken time to make a point that the Shepherds have very good scanning
Yeah,
technology. They know exactly when the away team's on the Comet, when they're not on the Comet, what they're doing. I mean, they've got eyes in the sky. They see everything the Enterprise is doing, and
yeah,
somehow they don't notice Spock flying like a bat out of hell, radiating all this heat energy and
yeah.
melting like half the Comet. They don't notice that apparently. So
Well, I mean, I took a little offense at this scene just because it's not really explained at all what he's doing until he's doing it.
yeah,
And
and
then on top of that, it was kind of a hokey explanation, but
who knows? Maybe the
yeah,
tractor beam that the Shepherds have takes 100% of the
there you
energy of the
go.
ship, so
There you
they
go.
have to turn their sensors off while they're using that tractor beam. Maybe.
So, well, whatever Spock is doing, like you said, he's flying this superheated shuttle through at least parts of this comet, causing it to melt, and ultimately, so the comet starts to break up around the shuttle, and enough of the comet actually breaks off, and it does affect their trajectory, and it does not hit the planet. So Mahani peaceably passes by Persephone 3. Mission accomplished. Everything's good.
And as we're flying, Spock is flying the shuttle, and the Enterprise is waiting to hear if he was successful. Um, for everything seems to go 100% according to plan. Spock flies the shuttle, it gets hot, it breaks off part of the comet, it moves the trajectory. Everything works exactly as they hoped, and then they lose contact with Spock for a few seconds. They're
Right.
they're trying to raise him,
Yep.
they get him on the comms and he's laughing,
Right. Like
and
a
they're
really
like,
kind of creepy laugh.
"Yeah," and they're like, "What the hell?" And he says, "Well, sometimes when things go wrong, the only thing you can do is laugh."
Except everything went
What went
100%
wrong? It,
right.
it
Exactly.
worked
Yeah.
perfectly. And I guess Spock just decided he wanted to like be a little more human. It was
Yeah.
so weird and unearned.
Agreed. The only thing I can think is like somehow the original script was different because, like I said, this scene felt like just rushed. There was not a lot of explanation.
Yeah.
But again, you got Hollywood hand wavy. It worked. It's all good. So what you see next is so enough of this comet actually breaks off. The ice from this comet breaks off, and it enters the atmosphere of this planet Persephone 3. And they actually make mention that so much ice and water vapor has fallen on the planet that it's going to affect the ecology of this planet, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think Spock at one point says that all this ice and water vapor may actually bring life to this planet, which is one of the things that the shepherds said was Mahani's job, was to spread life through the galaxy.
Right.
So right about this time, the Enterprise gets a call from the shepherds, and the line is, "You have seen the glory and the mercy that is Mahanit." So they are under the impression that this is just, just a regular day. This is what Mahanit
Yeah. This
does.
is
They're
what
just,
Mohini
yep,
wanted all along. This was the plan, and it's
yep,
happened. In spite of you.
yep.
In spite of your meddling, Mohini has fulfilled its destiny, and you should be more respectful of other cultures' beliefs as you go around the
Yeah, he even,
galaxy.
yeah, doesn't he say that? He's like, maybe next time you won't be so quick to judge or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So there's a super quick scene, and it cuts to the surface of the planet, and you see some Deleb natives, and they look up, and it starts to rain,
Yes.
and they kind of do a little rain dance. They're very happy to see this rain, and actually they looked way up in the sky, and you can actually see Mahanit leaving the
Right.
atmosphere or whatever. They see the comet,
Yeah.
and I made note that, holy guacamole, dude, the costume and the makeup on the Delebs was amazing.
Yeah, and
I just
they
thought they were
they
really cool looking.
yeah, we saw them at the beginning of the show. They were,
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of detail. Clearly they spent a lot of time designing these characters and doing the makeup and all that. So I assumed at the beginning of the episode that we were going to see a lot of them. But no, they're
no,
they're they're at the very beginning for a bit, and then we see them for a few seconds at the end to see the rain falling, and that's it.
but
So
yeah, their face makeup was really cool looking, and I thought the costumes that they had. I mean, it wasn't just a human wearing some clothes with some blue makeup on their face. Like it was,
yeah, it
they had
wasn't
some
the
very native.
humanoid of the week that we
Yeah,
typically get with prior Star Trek shows. So yeah, they've got some budget on this
yeah.
one,
So
clearly.
the two thumbs up from me to the costuming team for Strange New Worlds, because between this and the spacesuits from earlier, I thought they really knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, and for not a lot of screen time, and for these aliens that
Yeah,
really
that's a good point.
they could have just slapped it together and probably no one would have said boo about it. So
Right, it could have just been all CG that you gave to some,
yeah,
college intern, and it would have been fine. But
yeah, or
right,
just a little bit of face makeup and
yeah.
some ratty looking clothes because they're primitive, and that's it. So
So all's well that ends well. Essentially, the
yeah,
shepherds
and
are
the shepherds,
happy.
they are, and clearly they still don't seem to know that the Enterprise has engineered this outcome.
Yeah, right. That somehow that did slip through there. Right.
They seem to think, yeah, Mahanit decided to do this. It changed course. Now, you see, you should have just left Mahanit alone, and everything would have been fine. Whereas we know, no, if they hadn't done anything, the planet would have been destroyed.
Actually,
Um,
I think doesn't Pike kind of have that look on his face after the shepherds say
yeah,
like it would?
he's kind of
He
like,
kind of
oh yeah,
yeah.
totally. Like, yep, Mahanit did it all. Yeah, he plays along and doesn't tip off that they're the ones who did this.
So he's clearly convinced that this is just a pretty standard um, geological event, right? That there's nothing untoward had happened at this point.
Right.
So
And we saved the day,
yep.
and that was, if we hadn't been here, this would have been a disaster.
So the next scene, and this is where it gets pretty interesting, and this is where I kind of really enjoy the science fiction of Star Trek because they could have ended it right there, right? That
Right.
could have been the end of the
Yeah,
episode. Just,
totally.
but they went into a little bit more, and I thought this was kind of cool. So Uhura actually kind of does an after meeting debrief or an after mission debrief, and she says that she's had some more time to process the music and the data that they found on this egg, and that one of the things that they found as part of this writing was that they found a star chart um, that included the planet and all the planets around Persephone, but basically of that galaxy, and it actually had a flight plan. And in the flight plan that they got from Mahanit, it did not include colliding with Persephone. In fact, it avoided them completely. And there's a discussion of that
And
all of
it matched with the flight plan
yeah.
that Mahoney ended up taking.
But and so
But
the
but
question
this
was
message was sent to them before
or
they altered its course.
correct. So
Right.
there's this whole kind of like, well, wait a second, how did it know what was going to happen ahead of time? And she goes on to say that if you zoom in on this star chart and you will see an image or a specific piece of ice, and it also happened to be identical to one of the larger pieces that Spock broke off with the shuttle.
Right.
So the further implication here is that Mahanit is somehow sentient or something's going on, and it was able to foresee that the Enterprise was going to get involved and it was going to alter this flight plan, and that not only that, but it knew so much that it knew the exact shape of piece of ice that Spock was ultimately going to break off. And Uhura says it knew its fate, you might say. So there's no real explanation of really what Mahanit was, but it's clearly more
Right.
than just a rock like
And
they
that's,
thought.
yeah, and that line, it knew its fate, is very loaded. We get,
Yes.
a reaction from both Pike and Number One when she says that, because clearly we're tying this into Pike, who also knows his fate.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Good call.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and and the implication here is that all of this was preordained. That, like the shepherd said, Mahanit's path is preordained, and it's all going to happen exactly as it's meant to.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Yeah, right. So, um,
Now, the shepherds didn't understand that, that means that the Enterprise being here and interfering was also preordained, and they should have just let the Enterprise do their
yeah,
thing. But, apparently, yeah, all of this was necessary to get the outcome that we got, and Mahanit saw it all coming.
yep. So there's a quick scene where Spock and Uhura are walking in the hallway after this mission, and he basically updates his um, talk with her earlier, and he says, I don't know if this changes your decision to join Starfleet. I don't know what your plans are, but he does mention that now that I've seen you on an away mission, that I do want to let you know that Starfleet would be extremely fortunate to have you if you choose. So whereas before he was like, "Hey, lady, you need to get out of the way. If this is not your thing, then
Right.
let somebody else." But after this one mission, he's changed his tune.
Yeah, clearly she's impressed Spock.
And then the final scene,
And well, and it's well earned. She, yeah,
yeah,
Uhura kicked ass in this episode. She figured out the stuff with the music. She's really the only reason that they were able to make any headway. So
and she's probably the only one that could have, right? I mean, she just
yeah,
right place, right
totally.
time. I mean, if
Yep.
it, right. So
Yeah,
the
so she's
final
definitely the hero here in this one.
the final scene is Pike and number one in his I keep wanting to say quarters, but cabin, in his quarters slash cabin, and we're back to a discussion of fate, and
Right.
and Pike is still trying to wrap his brain around what's going to happen to him now that he knows, that he's going to die. So Pike has accepted his fate. He has to save those kids. He acknowledges that me saving these five kids, I believe is how many it is
Yeah.
more important than his own life. So
Right.
he's willing to do that even if it means his own death.
Right. Which is, so that's cool. But yeah, we have two very different takes here because number one basically says, hey, look, we just saw that, the future can be changed kind of
Right.
thing. Uh, and these guys got saved. The comet didn't hit them. The future's what you make of it is kind of her take, and off she goes. But that's not at all what happened.
Right.
What happened is the exact thing that was prophesized is exactly what happened.
Just not in the way people were expecting.
Right. So
Right.
despite all, everything anybody did, all these actions that people took, the outcome was exactly what Mahanit predicted. And so I think Pike's takeaway, and mine is too, is yeah, this vision ain't getting changed.
Right.
Like whatever I do is going to be what I would have done anyway
Yeah.
that leads to this outcome. So even though I know it's coming, the outcome's still going to happen because everything I do is what's going to lead to the outcome. So there's nothing. I mean, I have no way of avoiding this. I might
Yeah.
as well just embrace it. So yeah, let's find out about these five kids. So at least I know why I'm doing this.
So clearly we're setting up, because this is the second episode that we've really hammered home this idea of fate and whatnot. So clearly we're setting up a theme for at least this season, if not the entire
Right.
series. So we'll see. I do think that number one has an interesting line where she basically tries to convince him that, hey, maybe it's a possibility that you can save the kids and yourself. You
Right.
have this information, she
Yeah.
says,
Her take is that the future's not written yet. You can change what's going to
yeah,
happen. But yeah, the this episode seems to be really doubling down on no, like the vision's gonna happen,
yeah.
and Pike seems to think that too. Because yeah, he's not like, oh yeah, I guess I could change it and moving on. He's like, nope, I'm gonna look at these five kids because I know this is coming.
I kind of got the impression like she's trying to convince him that, at least try to
For
do
sure,
so.
yeah, she's
Like
trying to
don't,
say, hey, you're not doomed. You might be able to get out of this. Don't just give up. But I think he's more going, yeah, I'm just accepting that this is what's going to happen, and I'm going to make sure I know what my path is, and that these five kids get saved.
I get the impression like she's coming at it from like a crew member, like, look, like don't let this drag you down because we can't have a captain that's completely distracted and or obsessed with this. Like
Yeah, that's a part of it for sure.
giving
But
him
I
some sort
also
of
think she's just
alternative.
trying to help her friend,
Yeah,
saying,
right.
hey, don't feel like you're trapped here. Like there is a way out of this. You have to figure out what it is. But I think he's moved past that. It
Yeah.
seems like he's just decided, yep, I'm not going to try to avoid this.
Hmm.
I'm just going to try to find the path that leads me to saving these kids.
So the final scene basically is Pike sitting in front of his computer and he says, pull up, he asks the computer to pull up records on essentially the five kids, and he lists off their names. And like you said, he starts to do some research on them. He's trying to figure out who
Yeah,
these kids are. And, the presumption is, are they worth saving, or, what am I getting myself into?
right.
And then it star wipes and then we get
Yep.
credits. So
And I have to say, I was pleased that we didn't try to work any. any fan service or trickery into these. One of them isn't Kirk.
Oh, right. Yeah, good point.
So it was nice that it's not, someone famous in Star Trek land that we're gonna go like, oh man, he's gonna save so and so. It's
Oh, that's
just five members of Starfleet. We don't know anything about them. We just know that Pike's gonna save them in 10 years.
yeah, like if one of them was war for
Right,
right. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that would have been a little contrived. Good point. So that's it. That's the end of episode 2. Um, I thought it was a great episode. I really liked it. I thought it was a lot tighter and the themes were a lot better than the pilot. Um, I I
It's
really
about the same.
You think so?
Um, I mean, I definitely liked we got some more interactions with characters that aren't Pike or Spock. That was nice. Uhura really got a chance to shine. That was great.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess I did enjoy this one more just because of that. That we got some time with Uhura and Ortegas. Both of
Mm.
them got some time to shine, which was good to see. It wasn't just Pike and Spock save the day again. Um, but it's a pretty standard Star Trek plot.
Yeah.
Uh, we've seen episodes like this before, but again, this whole thing's a nostalgia factory, so there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
there's
I
nothing wrong with getting back on that bike again.
I liked the twist at the end, where hey, maybe it wasn't just to come, maybe there were, so they leaves it up in the air. I thought it was a cool episode. Like if all the episodes had this production value and this level of story, I would be totally fine with that because I enjoyed this. I would give this. I will rate this. Then you can tell me if I'm crazy. I
Okay.
would probably give this. I really like this episode. I'm going to go 9 out of 10. What
Oh
do you
wow.
think? Yeah.
I think I would have given the pilot maybe like a.
Did
I
we
maybe
rate
would have
the
given
pilot?
like
I
the
don't remember.
pilot like a 7 out of 10, and maybe this an 8 out of 10.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe
All right.
well, so I'd even. I don't know. I'd maybe give this a 7 out of 10. Maybe, but I don't want to. The 6 out of 10 sounds low for the pilot, so I don't know. Anyway,
Okay.
I feel like there's room to improve, but
All right. Well,
it's
we've got
solid Star Trek so far.
for sure. Yeah, we've got 8 more episodes
All right, I'm looking
into.
forward to it. Again, they've got me hooked. I definitely want to see where this is going, so I'll keep watching.
Cool. All right. That's all we got. We'll be back next time.
All
Adios.
right, see you in episode 3.